Exodus chapter 20 verse 1 to 17 gyapon. Let's sa ato ning himuon nga time sa pag-remind sa ato kay we will read as much as possible ang kaning Exodus 21:17 because dinhi ma-focus ang atong study for many questions to follow. So ato sa ning gamiton to remind ourselves of the 10 words of the covenant sa Ginoo. Exodus chapter 20 verses 1 to 17. And God spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself a carved image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and the fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing steadfast love to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male servant or your female servant, or your livestock, or the sojourner who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore, the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male servant, or his female servant, or his ox, or his donkey, or anything that is your neighbor's. Amen. Thus far, the reading of the 10 words of the covenant of our God. Now, this afternoon, mga igsoon, we will continue to consider ang atong nasugdan last meeting, ang question and answer 99. This is very important, tungod kay importante ang question 99 because nagtudlo ni on how we are to rightly and properly understand the 10 commandments. Question 99 is, again, preparatory ni siya, teaching us how we are to understand, again, kaning moral laws sa Ginoo. And that we know nga nagkinahanglan ta og rules sa right understanding sa 10 commandments because ang 10 commandments are not a complete application or dili siya detailed ba ang iyahang statement of the moral law, and but only a comprehensive summary. A summary, comprehensive, synecdoche or synecdoche, it inclusive na siya all the moral laws or the righteous rules of God on how we have to conduct our lives na adiha sa 10 words of the covenant. So mo na nga kinahanglan natong sabton as we will study each and every commandment following meetings nato. So atong basahon ang question 99. Question is, what rules are to be observed for the right understanding of the 10 commandments, which implies nga kinahanglan gid naa gid day say rules to understand. So these are the rules for the right understanding of the 10 commandments. These rules are to be observed. Number 1, that the law is perfect and bindeth everyone to full conformity in the whole man under or unto the righteousness thereof, and unto entire obedience forever, so as to require the utmost perfection of every duty, and to forbid the least degree of every sin. Second, it is that it is spiritual, and so reacheth the understanding, will, affections, and all other powers of the soul, as well as words, works, and gestures. Third, that one and the same thing in diverse respects is required or forbidden in several commandments. Fourth, that as where a duty is commanded, the contrary sin is forbidden. And whereas sin is forbidden, the contrary duty is commanded. So where a promise is annexed, the contrary threatening is included. And where a threatening is annexed, the contrary promise is included. Fifth, that what God forbids is at no time to be done. What He commands is always our duty. And yet, every particular duty is not to be done at all times. 6, that under one sin or duty, all of the same kind are forbidden or commanded, together with all the causes, means, occasions, and appearances thereof, and provocations thereunto. 7, that what is forbidden or commanded to ourselves, we are bound according to our places to endeavor that it may be avoided or performed by others according to the duty of their places. And the 8th one, that in what is commanded to others, we are bound according to our places and callings to be faithful, to be helpful to them, and to take heed of partaking with others in what is forbidden them. So muna ang rules. So there are rules, right understanding of the moral laws. Ang gilis sa divines din last meeting, sa review, quick lang, we consider na to ang first two rules. The first rule of right understanding of the moral law is to understand that the law is perfect. Perfect siya in its origin, that is from the perfect God. In its nature, perfect siya because righteousness na siya. And then, in its purpose, perfect siya kay revelation na sa Ginoo sa iyang kabubuton sa tuwa. And therefore, it binds, again, we are all subject. We are all under the moral law. And so, subject sa to all His command. And then, perfect obedience to all His commands. Subject ta sa iyang demand sa iyang perfect obedience to all commands. And ang obedience po nato is whole man. Body and soul. In other words, dili lang external ang atong obedience, also ang atong sulod. Spiritually, ang atong soul or emotions are kanang gitawag motives, diba? Ato pong i-check ang atong sulod as we obey the moral laws. And then ang iyahang perfect obedience is also perpetual, forever ni siya. Diba? Dili ni kay temporal lang. Even in glory, we are still to obey the moral laws of God. And the second one, the second rule for right understanding sa moral law is atong i-bear sa mind that this is spiritual. Spiritual, and so reacheth the understanding the whole of man. In other words, it in fact includes our words, works, and our gestures. You see, muna itong natunan. And this afternoon, nato i-consider ang third, fourth, ug fifth. I think mura natong makaya karon. So tiwason nato ni ang last three next meeting, Lord willing. So let us consider the third rule for right understanding of the moral law. I-bear nato sa itong mind. Number 3, that one and the same thing in diverse respects is required or forbidden in several commandments. So meaning that the same duty may be required or may be forbidden in one or more of the 10 commandments. So ang usa ka sin pwede nga na-forbid na sa dilang sa kakuman, pwede sa lain ng mga commandments. For example, what is required? Sa fourth commandment concerning the Sabbath says, ang fourth commandment ingon, 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the 8th commandment, God, which forbids stealing. Ang 8th command, nag-forbid sa stealing, thou shalt not steal, also requires a person to work. So, munang pasabot ani nga rule. So, naay command din sa 4th, it could also be commanded dito sa lain nga mga lain nga commandments at 10 commandments. Like kaning example, 4th commandments, Sabbath, gikinahanglan nga gikomanda to labor 6 days, do all your work in 6 days. But again, the forbidden nga command that forbids to steal is requires siya sa person to work for his living. For the person who lives without working is really stealing his living from someone else. You see, that's why si Paul sa Ephesians chapter 4 verse 28, nagingon siya, let the thief no longer steal. Nagingon si Paul, di ba? Siya, but rather let him labor, doing honest work for his own hands. So ang isa ka command ang fourth command nagcommand sa to labor. Kana siya nga command naapod sa lain nga commandment. So mo nang pasabot ani nga rule. So naa siya sa lain nga commandment, gi-command pod like sa kanang gitawag nga thou shalt not steal. So, ang thou shalt not steal, it includes the command to work. So, nakuha nimo ang rule ngayon pasabot. So, muna ilang pasabot diya. So, examples for what is forbidden. The seventh commandment forbids adultery. Diba? Ang seventh commandment, ayun, you shall not commit adultery, is also forbidden in the 10th commandment. Which is, naging dito, thou shall not covet your neighbor's wife. In other words, when you disobey the seven commandments, you also disobey the 10th commandment. So, muna ilang pasabot. So, naay command sa one command nga nagyapon sa pikas. Na gi-forbid din nga gi-forbid po sa other nga mga commandment. Another example is to bear false witness. For example, in a murder trial or murder nga trial, if you bear false witness sa usa ka murder trial, kabalo ka nga kita ka nga gipatay to dito, o nya ni witness ka dito sa korte nga moingong ka nga wala, di ba? Mo bear false witness ka dito is a violation of both 6th commandment that thou shalt not murder and also the violation sa 9th commandment that thou shalt not bear false witness. So, another example sa kanang rule 3 is kung mag-bear false witness ka, wala lang ka na makak, wala lang nimo na disobey ang 9th command that thou shalt not bear false witness, na disobey po nimo ang 6th commandment that thou shalt not murder. In other words, nakaparticipate ka to nga murder by bearing false witness sa mao nga case, mga ison. So another example is that the 10th commandment forbids covetousness, which is a violation of the first commandment. So ang 10th commandment, thou shalt not covet, that is the love of the things of the world, di ba? And then is a violation also of the first commandment that you shall have no other gods before me. Or even the whole gitawag nga first table of the law. So if you violate the 10th commandment, you covet things that are not yours, you love those things, and thus you covet, the violate nimo. In other words, mura kag nailain Dios apart from the one true God, which is commanded diya sa first command, that you shall have no other gods before me. Or again, pwede nimong na-violate ang whole or the first table of the law by coveting lang, by disobeying the 10th commandment. You have sinned against the first table of the law. Because mura kag nagbaton og lain Dios, ana, di ba? Nagbaton kag lain Dios. That's why si Paul calls a covetous man an idolater sa Ephesians chapter 5 verse 5, and then gitawag po niya ang covetousness as idolatry in Colossians chapter 3 verse 5. So ang covetous naman, idolatros na siya because na siya lain-lain Dios. That's why he covets things of the world and those things that belongs to others, because murag mo na iyang Ginoo. So gitawag na ni Paul og idolater ang covetous man and covetousness as idolatry. Another example is that the same sin may be involved both kaning covetousness and murder, a violation of the 10th and the 6th commandment. Thou shalt not covet and thou shalt not murder. Di ba? That's why in Proverbs chapter 1 verse 19 na ingon din such are the ways of everyone who is greedy, covetous for unjust gain. It takes away the life of its possessors. So when you covet the things of others, na kay covetousness, mura gyapon daw kang nag-commit og murder ana, because when you're greedy, you na kay unjust gain for coveting the things of others, sama kuno gi-take away nimo ang life sa imong gi-covetan, di ba? So nahulog nga na violate nimo ang gitawag nga thou shall not murder, because again ang sumala sa tunatunan is spiritual. Ang law is applied spiritually also, not only the act of killing but also the sort of like taking the life sa katong gikawatan nimo, or rather imong gi-covet nimong butang, gikuha nimo sa iya, wala na noy iya, and mura siya imong gikuha ang life sa iya. 1 Timothy chapter 6 verse 10, for the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. See, the one sin of covetousness results in all kinds of sin, in fact, or the violation of the other commandments like stealing and murder, for example. So, rule number 3 simply means that we can violate more than one command when one sin is committed sa isa ka gitawag nga command. So, in other words, pwede tang naka-violate sa many commands when we sin against one commandment. And conversely pod, pwede pod na po'y sense nga when we obey one command, we obey other commands. So mo nang pasabot diya. So we must understand nga kana tungod lagi kay summary ra man ni. So we need to understand that when we consider every commandment atong tan-awon og unsay other rules and commands that are included diha sa mao nga command. Kay lagi pwede natong ma-violate ang many commandments by just disobeying one. Pwede po natong na-obey ang many by just obeying one. So the question is why various commandments overlap in this way? In other words, ga-overlap ba? So why ga-overlap ni siya? Boss gives an answer to that question, why ang mga commands ga-overlap? Because he writes, ingon siya, because human life is complex and every fact of our life is related in some way or the other, and all the other facts of our lives. So complex ang kinabuhi. So when we disobey one, we disobey many, in fact, of the other commandments. What is certain sa 10 commandments, despite kani nga mga overlaps, is what is certain is ang commandments does not contradict. So bisag ga-overlap ang atong duty to perform and prohibitions sa mga butang nga di nato ang ibuhaton, what is important ani despite sa ilang overlap mga igsoon is that none of the commandments contradicts. That is, there is nothing prohibited or forbidden in one command that is required on the other command, and vice versa. So muna ang nakanindot, di ba? This is so because the law is perfect, reflecting the perfect God. God does not contradict himself. So makasure ta nga di command ni dinhi wala ni gi-prohibit dito spikas. So bisag na ay commandment nga gi-command dinhi unya makita nato dito nga napo dito, di ba? So but one thing is certain, again akong klarohon, walay commandment nga ga-contradict. So di ka kaingon nga dinhi gisugo ko sa pagtrabaho, ga-contradict man ni didto. Kaya nag-ingon dito di daw ko magtrabaho. So walay command di mo makita ngay nana. Because again, the law is perfect, reflecting the perfect God. So mura na ang rule number 3. So ato ta sa rule number 4. So nakuha, walay question diya sa rule number 3. So magamit nato tong rule number 3 to understand all these 8 rules. So rule number 4, na yung din yung rule number 4, that as whereby or that as where a duty is commanded, you see, the contrary sin is forbidden. And where a sin is forbidden, the contrary duty is commanded. So where a promise that is also is annexed, the contrary threatening is included. And where threatening is annexed, the contrary promise is included. So kana. So remember that the 10 commandments contain negative and positive forms of commands. Mostly, in fact, if we notice in 10 commandments, mostly 8 of it is in a form of a negative or negative form sa command. That is kanang thou shall not, or the similar nga pagka-words. And then only 2 are in fact positive. That is the 4th command and the 5th command. If you notice, ang 4th command na ingon, keep the Sabbath. And then, ang 5th command na yung dito, honor your father and mother. So, positive siya in a form, or rather, it is in a form positive. But this does not mean that the moral law of God is negative rather than positive, because both negative and positive have corresponding opposite commands. So, bisan og mostly 8 ana sa commands, murag negative siya, but it does not mean nga negative gid na ang command sa Ginoo, because even the negative na positive opposite ana. Then even food sa positive na ay negative opposite ana. The negative form ba? Ang like for example, ang honor your father na ay thou shall not dishonor your father. So makita nimo nga mo na ilang gipasabot dinhi. So concerning the commands and prohibitions, the Catechism says where a duty is commanded, the contrary sin is forbidden, and where that is the opposite, where the sin is forbidden, the contrary duty is commanded. So for example, again, the 5th commandment requires us to honor our father and our mother or our superior. It hence forbids to dishonor them. So honor your father, ang opposite na thou shall not dishonor your father. So naa ang opposite nga command. Not to submit to them also is a sin against the honor your father, or to despise your parents. And so unsay imong buhaton anything that is negative, imong disobey ang positive command to honor your father and mother. Though it's not stated there, but again, it is implied in that positive command. There is an opposite of the negative that we must not do. Now, on the other hand, the 8th commandment forbids stealing. The 8th commandment, thou shalt not steal, it also requires, again, the command, the contrary duty, sumala sa akong gipakita ganiya, the duty to work. You see, so makuha nimo diya nga ang command, ang opposite forbidden sin is nadya. So, ang 8th commandment is nag-forbid sa stealing, it also requires the command to the contrary duty to work that we may not be exposed to any temptation to steal, and again, do not stated mga igsoon. So, and then this principle applies to all the 10 commandments. So, this principle is applied to all the 10 commandments. So, every commandment has a requirements and the contrary prohibitions, then vice versa. So, kung ay prohibition, na ay gitawag nga na command na kinahanglan natong buhaton. So, concerning the promise dinhi and the threatening, the catechism applies the same principle. So, kung ang command, prohibition, kung prohibition, command. Diba? So, makita nato sa negative forms, na positive ana. So, katong mga positive, na po'y negative nga mga thou shall not ana. So, kanang keep the Sabbath holy, na po'y thou shall not profane the Sabbath, pwede na. So, nadya, nakabutang nadya. I mean, naana dia, taliwala nga wala siya explicitly nga na state mga ison. The same thing sa gitawag og threatening and kanang gitawag nga mga promise. Ang catechism na yun din so where a promise is annexed, nagibutang diyan, nagsumpayan nag-promise, the contrary threatening is included. And where the threatening is annexed, the contrary promise also is included. Example, the second and the third command containing threatening. Kanang second and the first table of the law, the second and the third contain threatening, and the fifth contains also a promise. Now, in the second commandment, the contrary promise is stated. So, makita nato diya, you shall not make you for yourself a carved image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above or that is in the earth beneath, that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them. Na ay gitawag nga din nga promise that is stated, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God. Rather threatening, visiting the iniquity of the fathers and the children to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, and then I promise yapon, but showing steadfast love to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments. And in the third also commandment, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, na ay threatening din na, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. But again, bisag na threatening na po'y opposite nga promise ana. So, kung negative na siya, na threatening sa third nga command, that the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain, but those also who honors the name of God, who does not take the name of the Lord in vain, na po'y promise ana opposite to those who that God will not take hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. So the opposite blessing, though not stated, again, is also promise, which we will learn later on when we deal with the third commandment later on, mga son. So, on the other hand, the fifth command, that is honor your father and your mother, is annexed with a promise. So, in fact, si Paul mo ni siyang gingon niya nga, first command that is with a promise. Ang point ni Paul, the first command sa second tablet, because this is not the first command. This is the fifth command. So, yung din, honor your father and your mother is annexed with a promise that your days may belong in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. Though again, the contrary threatening is not stated, but it is expected. So, if you don't dishonor your father, ang dili madawat ang promise, but madawat po nimo ang gitawag nga implied nga threatening sa Ginoo. You see, that's why many of the Israelites who did not honor their parents, who did not even honor the authority, even Moses, they died dito sa wilderness. Kay na promise if you obey, but na ay threatening, though not stated, if you disobey. So din the promise is that your days may belong in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. So those who disobey authority, those who disobey their parents, even those who disobey their father and mother, despise them, they died early. Matay sila sayo. Wa sila magdugay sa kalibutan. Kaya nga naman, ang next nga gitawag nga threatening is implied dinhi sa maong command. So, we will see this principle applied again when we consider each of the 10 commandments. Kay na ay command, na i-prohibit, na i-prohibit, na i-command, na i-promise, na i-threaten, na i-threaten, na i-promise. So, that is simply what the rule diha mean. So the negative commandments carry on a contrary positive command, vice versa, and the commandments that carry promise and threatening also both implies their opposites. Sabtan. So kanara. So this is preparing us to understand these things later on, rather the 10 commandments, using this law, rules. Alright, let's consider the fifth. So move kita. So let's consider the fifth rule, to rightly understand the 10 commandments. So the fifth there is that what God forbids is at no time to be done. And what He commands is always our duty, and yet every particular duty is not to be done at all times. So, atong sabto na. Say pasabot na. Si bosses, this implies that we are always under the moral law or the moral government of God. And responsible for Him, for the state of our hearts, and for all our thoughts, words, and deeds. We can never take a vacation, atod pa niya, from our duty to God to obey the moral laws. All our life long, every moment, until eternity, even in hell, we are bound and we are under obligation to obey the moral laws of God. So, muna sabot din eh. So, din eh, makita natin in fact the great principle of ethics. What God forbids, yung din eh, it is at no time to be done, and what God commands is always our duty. In other words, what God forbids must never be done. That's the rule. So, dili kay... tayo nga pwede ra. So, giklaro din sa rule that what God forbids must never ever be done. First, even if we suffer. Even if we suffer, we must choose not to sin. So, inana ang rule. Inana ang pagsabot, inana ang pag-apply sa moral law sa Ginoo sa ato. That is, even if we suffer, we must choose not to sin. That is, we rather choose affliction than sin. Because lagi, whatever God forbids must never ever be done. That is, dayon din eh, Job 36 verse 31, take care, do not turn to iniquity, for this you have chosen rather than affliction. Moses did this, ang Hebrews chapter 11 verse 24-25, ang writer sa Hebrews, tingin siya, by faith Moses, when he was grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. Tingin siya, choosing rather to be mistreated with the people of God than to enjoy the pleasures or the fleeting pleasures of sin. Ipili ni Moses ang mag-antos uban sa katawan sa Dios, in other words, to do what's right rather than to sin. See, that is, nung nagipasabot sa gingon sa mga divines that what God forbids must never be done. We rather choose affliction. We rather choose to suffer. We rather choose shame than to sin. Say, maulawan man tamutog ang tagtinuod. Tinuod mo po na makakta. Rather tinuod naghimutag butang. So kung mamakak pa ta, kay mamakak lang ko, kay maulawan kong samot ani. Dili, balag maulawan ta. Sultin lang natong tinuod. Yan man, para dili ta kasala sa Dios. So, muna yung point din eh. Second, even for a good purpose. First, that is, that what God forbid must never be done. That is, even if we suffer, we choose to suffer, rather choose to suffer than to sin. Second is, even for a good purpose. We must choose not to sin. For example, kaning perverse nga notion bitaw nga gingon nga the end justifies the means. Murag Robin Hood ba? Kabalo man mo sa Robin Hood nga style, di ba? Ngawat si Robin Hood kay iya ra putong ipatabang sa pobre. So kanang perverse nga atong itawag anang notion nga the end justifies the means. Kanang ngawat ta kay ato ra pud ning gibahog sa pobre. Munang mga politician, mga kaw sila kay ilang pud nang gitabang sa constituent. Is that justifiable, di ba? Dili. Mo engage ta gambling para makakwarta ta, para makahatag ta og panginabuhi sa ma-provide na tong needs sa tong panimalay. Pero we sin para sa maayo. So ang rule says sa 10 commandments na God forbids, what God forbid must never be done. We rather choose to suffer, and then dili pud ta mo sin even for a good purpose. Ano na may lain other way siguro. Mo si Robin Hood na mo to sila in pamaagi. Ganahan siya mga awat. Pwede man to siya magtrabaho siguro mananom para makatabang. So there are other ways than to violate the law of God. So mo ni ang gipasabot dinhi nga dili ta kay say ano ba ta kanang dali master man ta sa pag-justify God. Maghimo tag sala atong i-justify kay ang purpose mahimo pud. Di ba? Di ba? Say mo ta nga kung simple lagi Ginoo nagtrabaho pud ko kay para bayad ko sa akong utang. So mayo man ang mobayad ka sa utang pero ayaw sa Domingo pagtrabaho. Kay min ka Lord kay Domingo ron pud to sila magpa-cutic sa kuha. So, dili tana. So we rather choose nga silang balag magkalisod ta, di man pud ta pasagdan sa Ginoo pod. Ang point there is whatever God forbids, it must never be done. Kuha mga igsoon. Kuha so mura stricto kay Ginoo pero silang na may grace ang Ginoo. Even if we fail, He will always forgive us. But again, still we must not lower the standard sa Ginoo on how we are to conduct or understand and even to apply the moral laws sa Ginoo sa atong kinabuhi mga igsoon. So kana in fact, si Paul is against this notion. Romans 3:8 ningon si Paul, they were accused, di ba? And why not do evil that good may come, as some people slanderously charge us with saying, ningon si Paul, their condemnation is just. Even si Paul is against the notion that we do evil so that good will come. He is against ana nga notion. Case scenario inani, for example, common man kay ni siya. Common man kay ni kay mabutang tani nga mga scenario ba nga if someone wants to kill a person, nakabalok kang asa siya, nga mutana ang killer, kita ka sa iya, kita gugaw niya, umuing kag sa may baton, makak or itugan. Ano case ba? Labi na imulugang mama, na imong papa, na imong patay sa iya kay nangutang niya, bayad niya, patyon siya. Ya kabalo ka nasa siyang kwarto, niya sulod ang tao, asa imong papa, asa siya, nasa dinhi, unsa may moingon. Thou shall not, what God forbids man yun, di lang ko, nasa sa kwarto. So, yung baton. Normally, makakong kita, di ba? Pero, makonsider ba na nga nabaka ka or just for saving life? Thou shall not murder mo po. Saan sa? Or matawag ba na nga self-defense or imong gidefensaan nimo dili self-defense imong gidefensaan nimo papa ba nga or imo pud siyang gibawalan na mo commit murder. Di ba? Na may case sa scripture di ba si Abraham na makak pero kato idigsoon pud silang Sarah sa tinuod lang. Di ba si Isaac pud na makak mapud siya. Ha? Unsa na siya? Oh, si Rahab po, di ba? Katong spies, di ba? Iya gitaguan. Does that mean na si ang Ginoo ni consent sa iyang pagpamakak? Lagi na may cases nga na. Lagi ako, muyon, magikunguha din eh. Di ba na, magkita, di ba? Mga na magkita ulas mama kung maningil ra ganing torko, may magkita wala. Samot, nagpatiyon. So, unsa man si mong una ana? But still the law, the rules still applies, di ba? Pero ikaw na magtimbang-timbang ana. Thou shall not kill, thou shall not lie. Di ba? Naman gitubag ana, di ba? Namay tubag. And then to murder the one who knew without a doubt, di ba? Another scenario kanang i-murder nimo ang tao nga nagplano nga nag-murder sa imo. Kana bang naitaw ba nga nagplano nga mupatay sa imo ha? Nga unhan na nimo sa patay. Ha? Or kanang siguro hulatan lang siguro nimo nga patyo na kaniya kay aron igmapatay nimo siya, self defense man to. Pero nagplano man siya, post lang man nagplano siya, magplano kog ako unhan na ilang ta. De siguro no ko imo gyud siyang unhan murder gyapon na ba? Kay why not i-report na lang nimo sa authority siguro ba? Na may other things to do man god. Siguro kung akto na gyud hulatan sa nimo dabig di ka kabantay. Nabunalan gid ka. So imong nahuna, di ko magkumpiyansa. Unhan na lang gid nako. Ya gi-report na ko sa pulis, dugay maging pulis, ako na lang gining unhan. Lagi. Imo to silang, di naman imo to siya mabunalan kay napadlakan man kasulod. Lagi. Lagi sila gawas, no? Dawig na sunog to, masugba sila dito kay gipadlakan. Katong nagpadlak, nakasala, magyapon to siya. Kasala, gyapon to siya. Iyang butang sa danger ang life dito ba? So, na-violate yapon ang thou shall not murder. Di ba? Kanang, matupad nila, you take risk sa imong life ba? You're just, if you put your life in risk, you violate the command that thou shall not kill. Mura na siya suicide ba? So, kani mga scenario lang, but I believe na when we come sa ani nga gitawag nga mga butang or ani nga mga cases, diyan na nimo itimbang-timbang og lagi no. Pero again, the rule. Ako lang ning gibutang nga scenario kay naman gud ni sa tinuod man gud ni. Makakbako, naningil ra man ni siya. Ay tugan ko lang ni naningil ra man pod. Na si mama dia, di siya kabayad. Ana lang ko di ba isultin lang nato nga na si mama. Ya di siya kabayad. Na siya po na yun man siya di magsaba. Nakabutang ka sa honor your mother. Thou shall not lie. So ni honor your mother, thou shall not lie. Dili. Sulti gikas tinuod, di ba? It is not dishonoring your mother pod. So kanang gibutang lang ako ni dinhi kay para nga makahuna-huna mo gamay. Pero again, the rule is that what God forbids must never be done. Must never be done. And then second is what God commands is always our duty. It is always our duty. In other words, what He forbids must never be done. What He commands must always be done. Here we see again, the moral law requires perfect obedience. Despite our inability to obey it perfectly, we are bound to obey it, mga igsoon, even sa difficult nga circumstance. So, bisag di na nato ni ma-obey perfectly, but again, dili ni license nato ang muinta nga, di mo na ako ma-obey perfectly. Muhulog na lang ko aning thou shall not lie, di na ako mamakak lang ko. Dili po pwede. Because again, the rule is what God commands was always our duty. In fact, ang atong may buhaton, ang gingon sa Deuteronomy chapter 12, verse 28, na yung naging be careful to obey. Sige na to ni perfectly ma-obey, but let us always be careful to obey all these words that God has commanded us, that it may go well with you, ingon si Moses, and with your children after you forever, when you do what is good and right in the sight of the Lord your God. Be careful to obey. Kana na lang. Do we fail? But at least we're careful in obeying them. Di ba? Sabtan ninyo, kinanglan gid natong buhaton ang moral laws. Deuteronomy 15 verse 5, yung dini, if only you will strictly obey the voice of the Lord your God, being careful to do all this commandment that I command you today. So nagi command even to be careful and to strictly obey the Lord's command. Ezekiel 20 verse 19, I am the Lord your God, walk in my statutes and be careful to obey my rules. You see, na time nga medyo tempted to disobey, but we must strictly obey the laws of God. Ezekiel 36:27, ingon dinhi, and I will put my spirit within you and cause you to walk in my statutes and be careful to obey my rules. Again, natay total inability, but napoy grace ang Ginoo that He has placed His Spirit within us that we may walk in the ways of God and that we may be in fact careful to obey my rules. You see? So, nagi mga temptation nga makadisobey ta to not keep the Sabbath holy, o say mag-desecrate nato, o say nga atong obedience to keep the Sabbath holy is half day ra. Di ba? Holy, the whole day man tata mo dapat mo keep the Sabbath holy, and sometimes di nato na siya ang atong obedience is partial, musin gyapon ta. But again, I hope nga atog yung carefully obey ang words sa Ginoo mga igsoon. Kay lagi dili magid ta karon totally unable to obey kay naaman ang spirit sa Ginoo sa ato nga mag-help sa ato nga mo-obey, even our obedience becomes acceptable unto God. Again, though we cannot perfectly obey, but we must not use it as a license not to be careful with our duty to obey. And then notice din niya atong catechism, last nga point, finally, the divines here, naingon sila din. And yet, every particular duty is not to be done at all times. Ay, salamat, naragid ni. Akong ipangita, not to be done at all times. Pero sa ilang pasabot anang ilang statement. And yet, every particular duty is not to be done at all times. Of course, they are not saying ang divines din that obedience or performance of our duty is arbitrary, that is subject sa ato ang discretion, preference, gana, sometimes itaganahan, say ganahan. Sometimes natay desire mo obey, sometimes dili. So dili na mao ilang gipasabot nga kanang statement particular duty is not to be done at all times because mo contradict sila sa ilang emphasis sa full and perpetual complete obedience. So what they mean here is that there are duties that do not always present themselves to us. So mura na ilang gipasabot dinha. Si Thomas Ridley ingon siya, again, what God commands is always a duty. Kalo ni Ridley ni siya, so that there is no season of life in which it ceases to be so. For example, ano pa niya? No season in life that it ceases to be. For example, praying, reading, hearing the word of God, etc. Yet these duties, kani nga duties, to gining always obey. You always obey nato ni. Dili ni walay season sa life nga dili ta magampo. I mean, night time, nga murag night time di ta mo disobey ta sa reading, mo hearing sa word of God. But yung point din is these duties are not actually to be engaged in every moment of our lives. It is always our duty to visit the sick, comfort the afflicted, defend the oppressed, but ingon siya, but such objects do not always present themselves to us, so as to render it our duty at all times. In other words, although we are to obey God's law, but night time nga na certain laws nga dili na to i-obey sa mga moments sa atong life ba. Seriously din wala siya nag-promote og arbitrary performance sa duty, but again, that duty always obey depends upon the opportunity nga naaang gitawag nga opportunity nga mo obey ta. So only in this sense that every particular duty is not to be done at all times. Only when the opportunity is not there. Only when the opportunity is not there. Vos says, ingon siya, it would of course be not only impossible but absurd to attempt to do every particular duty at all times. Impossible na. Some duties are specifically limited to a certain time. For example, Sabbath observance. Dili man na nimo pwede i-obey 6 days. Kaya nga naman, ang Sabbath is Sabbath naman. So muna ilang simple kayo. Logical. Common sense. But even the duties that are not so limited are not to be done at all times. We are to rejoice with them that rejoice and weep with them that weep, but not both at the same time. So long as the opportunity is presented, we must obey. Dili man ta pirmi mo tabang, pero kung naay tabangan, we must obey ng mutabang. So muna i-point din So again, kung unsay command must be done. Kung unsay forbid must not be done. But again, dili tanan panahon nga all the commandments at the same time imong i-obey. Na ay time nga dili na nimo siya ma-obey, dili tungod kay arbitrary, dili tungod nagdepende sa imo, tungod sa circumstances or sa opportunity nga wala ma-present sa imo. Diba? So dili man tanan nga nag-honor ka sa imong mother o father. Especially literally kung wala na kay father o mother. Diba? So wala po na nagpasabot nga exempted na ko kay wala ko'y mamagpapa, exempted na ko sa 5th command, thou shalt not honor your father and mother. Wala na ko'y mamagpapa. Dili kay part sa command is to submit yourself to authorities. Diba? So that's the point sa gitawag og rule number 5. Rule number 5. So what God forbids is at no time to be done, and what He commands is our duty. And then yet every particular duty is not to be done at all times. Again, not arbitrarily, but so long as the opportunity is presented. So in other words, i-obey gid nato permi. Di ba? I-obey nato permi. So di lang nato na siya ma-obey kung wala ang kahigayunan. Dili pasabot nga di nato siya i-obey kay night time siya dili nato siya dapat i-obey. No. Walay say time nga dili nato siya dapat i-obey. Dapat nato siya i-obey. Di ba? So di lang nato siya ma-obey, di lang nato ma-perform ng duty kung ang opportunity wala. So that is the point nila sa kanang gitawag nga every particular duty is not to be done at all times. Particular duty. Alright, so ato i-consider ning tulo next meeting na lang.